Will Cain, Fox and Friends Weekend co-host. This is really disturbing stuff. I mean, the Chinese government has done everything in its power to stonewall investigations. We know that. But now we're learning that according to Congresswoman Nicole Malliotakis, Dr. Anthony Fauci actually could be at the center of what she calls one of the biggest cover-ups in American history.
Yep, and then I would only add to what Jim Jordan was saying there. And yet, Julie, still today, if you question Fauci's sainthood, you are a wingnut. Redfield, again, it's worth underlining and highlighting. Former director of the CDC laid out a couple of really fascinating points, Julie, that I want to reiterate. First of all, in September of 2019, that Wuhan lab changed 3 protocols that imply guilt. They deleted the strains, the codes of the virus. They changed from civilian to military oversight. And then they brought in a civilian contractor to change the ventilation system. Every one of those pieces of big circumstantial evidence pointing to their own guilt, that it was a virus created in a lab. And yet then we see the cover-up you point out. Fauci, in league with social media, of course, paints anyone who points to that truth as a conspiracy theorist. And then, again, pays off $9 million in grants to 2 scientists who said, hey, this looks like it was made in the lab. They flip. All of a sudden, they're on the same script as every other scientist out there saying it's of natural origin. Then the most fascinating question, Julie, why? And that's what Malliotakis gets to. The reason why Fauci would go to such great lengths is because of his own culpability. What he's covering up is his guilt in helping fund this worldwide pandemic. The more interesting question isn't Fauci, because that seems obvious to me, is why did the entire scientific community rally behind Fauci? And that gets us to, well, masks, lockdowns, vaccines. It's because science is lost, and it is not science. It is scientism. And it followed the Saint Fauci wherever it told them they should march. That's why the scientific community fell behind a guy who was covering up his own culpability.
The most disturbing in this is I cannot understand, I cannot grapple with the fact that the American public was not informed of this known theory years ago. It's not like it was just discovered. They've known for years. This after millions of people lost their lives. And yet still, there's a denial from the White House. There's a denial from Fauci that he ever believed that it could have potentially come from a lab. And then we hear about this $9 million, which was a grant to research, for the research doctors to go forward to that paper, which was never even forwarded to the CDC director. None of it adds up.
Oh, it adds up, though. I think it does add up, Julie. It adds up to
lies.
An obvious,
it adds up to lies. That's
cover-up.
Yeah,
lies and cover-up.
Yeah, it's really disturbing, and I mean, thank God that there is this hearing right now. If it weren't for this hearing, this would have been swept under the rug. And then you have to wonder, what else is being swept under the rug, if not for Republicans holding hearings to come up with answers?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, I'll say this, Julie. So why is this important? And it's not just retrospective. Gain-of-function research is still taking place in unsecure labs in China. To this day, gain-of-function research is part of scientific protocol. That's one. 2, as you point out, if you went to these links to cover up this story, what else did you cover up? Science doesn't, by its very nature and definition, shouldn't, and it doesn't in the popular consciousness, I think, anymore, demand blind faith. That is not science.
Got to switch gears here now. President Biden's disastrous withdrawal from the Afghanistan front and center at a House hearing yesterday. Lawmakers looking for answers here as well. There were some really powerful stories from those on the ground during the 2 weeks of this chaos, which occurred in August of 2021. One witness, a Marine sniper, who lost an arm and a leg in a suicide bombing at the Kabul airport. He gave gut-wrenching testimony about the moments following the explosion that left 13 U.S. service members dead, something he said could have been prevented.
A flash and a massive wave of pressure, I'm thrown 12 feet onto the ground, but instantly knew what had happened. I opened my eyes to Marines dead or unconscious lying around me. A crowd of hundreds immediately vanished in front of me, and my body was catastrophically wounded with 100 to 150 ball bearings now in it. Plain and simple, we were ignored. Our expertise was disregarded. No one was held accountable for our safety.
Ignored. Can you imagine your son, your husband, fighting overseas, and you know that they could have protected themselves. That was Marine sniper Sergeant Tyler Vargas Andrews. Remember that name, he's a hero. He described how he and his fellow Marines indefinitely identified a suicide bomber before he killed 13 U.S. service members. He said that no one in the chain of command, Will, even knew who could give the sharpshooters the okay to take out the bomber before he got away with this grisly attack. He says, plain and simple, we were ignored. Our expertise was disregarded. This is a glaring example of how the Afghanistan pullout, ordered by our president, put our troops at grave risk.
Absolutely. He said he identified, along with other soldiers, they had a description, and he identified the suicide bomber hours before this attack took place. They had a description, they identified him, and they asked for permission to engage. And they were denied that permission. And when asked why, the answer he was given was, I don't know. And therefore, they never were allowed to engage. The suicide bomber disappears once they get into the crowd hours later. What happens, as he describes right there. You know, Julie, it's just, you can listen to and talk to the soldiers on the ground almost to a man. And I've gotten to know a few of these guys who, for example, were involved in Operation Pineapple Express, Scott Mann, who testified yesterday as well. And when you see the competency, Julie, of the men on the ground, when you see the competency of the soldiers who stepped up in the void of the federal government, you see what could have been. But in alternative, in reality, unfortunately, what we had was incompetence in leadership. If you have competency on the ground, but you have a catastrophe in reality, what you have to see then is you have incompetency at leadership, driven by, I don't know, failure, fear, driven by incompetence. Who knows what it is, but it adds up to failure. And it lands squarely on leadership. It lands squarely on, you have to, the buck, as Harry Truman said with the sign on his desk, the buck stops here. The buck passes to the ultimate leader, and that is the President of the United States.
You're absolutely right. Will Cain, well said. Thank you so much. Great to see you.
I'm Steve Ducey.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.